Controller General of Customs, Mr. Adewale Adeniyi, on Saturday said consultations are ongoing on reopening of the borders. This is as he noted that only President Bola Ahmed Tinubu has the power to reopen borders in the country. He stated this at the interactive session with members of the Kangola border community in Milada local government area of Katsina State. Adeniyi was reacting to agitations for the reopening of the borders, ascertained that engagement and consultations were being made regarding the issue, and once consultations are concluded, a decision will be taken on the matter, he said. According to Adeniyi, the service will focus on removing obstacles, mitigating against free trade in line with the present administration, a focus on fostering economic progress, and that the service was collaborating with police and other sister agencies to address obstacles affecting free trade in the border areas. He stated that Nigerian Customs will continue to monitor and ensure that food that is being produced in Nigeria remains in the country. This is, as he said, is because the nation is in a period of national emergency that has to do with food insufficiency. This recent statement is coming from the Controller General of the Customs at a time where we have a recent call for reopening of the border for free trade, especially as the prices of goods and other commodities have surged, putting undue pressure on the citizens of the country. But the big question on the big story for today, will such a call be heeded by Mr. President, knowing they have made it clear that importation of food is not on his table? And if the borders are finally reopened, what impact will this have on local farmers and producers? Well, these and more, as we talk about the recent call for the reopening of the border, is what this edition of the big story is all about. We're talking about the federal government and issue of border reopening. That's what we're having as a major one today on the big story. We're talking about the recent call for the federal government to reopen the borders to deal with the issue of shortage and insufficiency that the country seems to be experiencing. But anyway, he's right here to help us talk about it. I'm talking of no other person but a social critic and economist, and we're talking of no other person but Mr. Wilson Boje. Good morning and welcome to the show, sir.
Good morning, Bakari, and our listeners out there.
Well, anyways, I want us to first start by looking at the statement attributed to him, and I mean the Controller General, no other person but Bashiru Adewale Adeniyi. And he said, I'd like to go ahead and state his quotes and rather take him as he said it. He said, "We are conscious of the concerns of the border communities, particularly with regards to the number of checkpoints and the closure of land borders, and he said, I assure you that we will continue to communicate the concern and complaints to Mr. President on the issue of reopening of the borders." So he said yesterday. So my question now is, do you feel the pressure is on the federal government to review its stand on the issue of the closure of the borders? And if you feel the pressure seems to be on Mr. President, why so? Because the reason I'm asking this is that in most recent time, the call for the reopening of the border seems to be growing louder by the day. And no surprise, the Controller General himself had a meeting with border communities just on Saturday. So do you feel the pressure is on, and why do you feel there's a recent renewed pressure on the federal government to deal with the issue of border reopening?
If the pressure is on, then it must be addressed.
Okay.
For instance, it is government policy, or it was government policy that led to the closure of borders.
Of course.
And whatever steps are going to be taken to reverse it must also come as a government policy.
Okay.
And government policies don't come from one individual. Because when government policies come from an individual, you invite chaos into the system. I think that's what we are going through at the moment. Yeah, that's what we are going through. From all indications, there was no concerted effort to put Nigerians on the state we have, in the state we have found ourselves at the moment. So, the government should set up an agency to examine this national emergency that is confronting us at the moment.
So do you feel the current scarcity of food products and goods are the reason this renewed pressure seems to be on the federal government?
Of course. You know, the high cost of living is of major concern to everybody. And if we had the food in the country, there would be no need for us to clamor for border reopening. The truth is that we are faced with a maze of problems, and I think government has to really sit down and think of how to address the issue. Okay, now the food is not available.
Yes.
Farmers are not going to the farms because of insecurity. And there's no way you can, it's not manna, we're not talking about manna that falls from the sky. People have to go to the farms, cultivate, and harvest before you can have this food sufficiency. So until we address this issue of insecurity, there is no way we can have sufficient food. And if we cannot have sufficient food because of insecurity, then we'll have to bring food from outside or we starve to death.
Okay, now, I need to ask this because why I have to ask this question is that I'm wondering why so much pressure is being put on this administration. Because if we take our mind back to memory lane, since the return of democracy, we saw the border, especially that of Benin, being closed in 2005, 2006 by former President Obasanjo when there was high rate of stealing of
criminality.
Yes, from this country being taken away to Benin, Niger, and other countries. That's number one. And not only that, in 2019, August to be precise, former President Muhammadu Buhari closed the border. And he talked about the issue of growing food sufficiency in the country. So my question is, okay, why is making this one so serious that it looks as if you're putting so much pressure on this administration when the reason this administration has given is they want to protect local farmers? So why this undue pressure on this administration?
But it is one thing to protect local farmers so that their products can be marketed profitably. And it's another thing to protect these local farmers so that when they go to farm, they will not be killed.
So you feel he's doing one rather than the other?
Yeah, you want to protect the farmers, you want to protect the crops, and the crops are not coming. Are the people going to the farm to bring out these crops? They cannot go to the farms because they are not safe in the bush.
So it's not an issue of border.
It's not a border issue. What Nigeria should address primarily at the moment is insecurity, the problem of insecurity. If you look at the middle belt is the bread basket of Nigeria. This middle belt is experiencing the highest level of insecurity. So there's no way people are going to the farms. If people are not going to the farms, the farm products will not be available. So it is the question of insecurity that should be addressed first and foremost. Before we start talking, what food are we giving the protection to? We are protecting local farmers against importation.
Yes.
Now the farmers are not going to the bush to farm. So what are you protecting? What are the products you are protecting against deluge from outside? These are the questions we have to ask ourselves. Well, I think we are running a pipe dream. We're running a pipe dream.
That's a strong statement.
Yeah, so what we should do is open the borders. Since you can't protect the farmers and make them come out with the farm products, unless you want to starve Nigerians to death, the best option is to go and open the border. Let the food come in. Even if we don't have the money to buy it, let it come in. If it comes in, this high cost of living will also come down, because they are not going to import it at a price that we cannot afford. So I think the government needs to really settle down and strategize. Government should strategize. If it means raising a 1 million man army, let the federal government go and raise the army. Send about 20,000 soldiers to every state. We'll be able to protect the farms. All this question of banditry and so on will be greatly reduced if we are sincere. So it's not about protecting farm products that are not there. What are you protecting? Why are we deceiving ourselves and calling it a policy? When are we going to grow up enough to project ourselves as people who are focused and serious about running an economy? I mean, these are the issues we have to look at, examine at the moment.
Well, anyway, those are the issues we're looking at, and we're looking at the recent call for the federal government to reopen the borders, especially looking at that very meeting, our interactive section that the Controller General of the nation, and we're talking of Bashir Adewale Adeniyi, had with members of our communities that seem to border around Nigeria and also Niger and Katsina, to be precise. But would that call be yielded to with what he gave a promise that he will relay the information he had, or the interactive session he had with the border communities to Mr. President, to see if the borders will be reopened? If you still remember, this administration, just like the former, came up with a policy of border closure, undermining the opened some few borders, but is still maintaining the issue of the closure of the borders. But we're not closing or ending the gist now. We'll rather go on a break, and when we come back, we'll continue our discussion as we look at that recent call for the federal government to reopen all the borders. Let's go on a break.